Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Just to confirm, you're in the right workshop. Today, we'll be discussing the proposed rule for the control of VOCs from paper, film, foil, fabric, and vinyl coating operations. My name is Dawn Leeper. I'm a Principal Air Quality Specialist for the Department of Environment and Sustainability, Air Quality Division in the Planning section. I am the project manager overseeing the development of the Serious Attainment Plan for the 2015 Ozone Standard. As stakeholders, we welcome your feedback and encourage your participation, which is vital to the development and implementation of this rule. Feel free to engage with us during the presentation by asking questions and offering any insights. You may do so by raising your virtual hand or submitting your question in the chat. Because we seek your thoughts and opinions and encourage further involvement, we will be asking poll questions periodically during the discussion. If you encounter any difficulties entering your response, you may type it into the chat. To assist with the plan and rule development, we've partnered with consultants from Sonoma Tech, Inc. Please welcome our speaker, Megan McCabe.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dawn, for the intro, and thanks again for joining us today. I am Megan McCabe from Sonoma Technology, helping out Clark County today, and I will be speaking on the proposed rule. On the screen here, we have some of the primary rulemaking leads and their contact information. And as Dawn said, we have a few poll questions today that will pop up in your chat, and we will have time for questions throughout the presentations. And it does look like we are a pretty small group today, so feel free when we do stop for questions just to unmute and ask, or you can put it into the chat. Great. So I am going to dive into some of the background around the legal landscape that brought us to develop the rule today, and then we'll go through the rule itself. This comes from the Clean Air Act, which allows the United States Environmental Protection Agency, known as the EPA, to establish national ambient air quality standards known as the NAAQS. These are limits set by EPA for specific pollutants, and in this case today, we're talking about the pollutant of ozone. These standards are meant to protect public health. And now EPA designates areas as non-attainment if the ozone levels are above the set NAAQS. And besides just being out of attainment, there are classifications for which indicates how far out of attainment an area is. So for the 2015 ozone standard, which is the ozone standard we are discussing today, there are 5 different classifications starting with marginal. We have that is the closest to attainment, and then it goes all the way up to extreme, being the region is the furthest from attainment. And now these classifications do matter as there's different requirements set by law for each classification level. So previously, Clark County was classified as moderate for the 2015 ozone standard. And in December 2024, so just last year, EPA reclassified Clark County from moderate to serious, and this classification was effective January of this year. So, as a result of this change, Clark County Department of Environment and Sustainability Division of Air Quality, listed as DAQ in this presentation, must revise our non-attainment state implementation plan, known as the SIP, by developing a new attainment plan. Oh, are we not seeing things on the screen? Just want to check in with the chat here for a second. Can I get a confirmation that people are seeing my slides?
Yes, they said it's coming through.
Okay, yeah, it looks like it's coming through for some people and some people are not. So I think we'll get slides to people who are not coming through. All right. So this serious classification is not applicable to all of Clark County. So the serious classification is only applicable to the hydrographic area 212. This is also known as the Las Vegas Valley. This is kind of like the darker orange color here. So it includes Las Vegas, includes Henderson and North Las Vegas. But again, the being out of attainment isn't for the whole Clark County. It's just for the 212 area. And then this is a snapshot of our timeline for the attainment plan. So again, this was classified as serious just this last January, and the attainment plan submission deadline is this January 2026. So just a few weeks away. However, the actual attainment date to hit that ozone standard is August 3rd, 2027. Now, it is important to note if DAQ fails to make a timely submission, EPA can begin a sanctions clock, which could lead to the loss of federal highway funds and other penalties. Or the federal government could impose a federal implementation plan that allows the federal government to create an implementation plan to reduce ozone. So it is important that we get a timely submission here. And now again, this is all part of the Clean Air Act. So for this rule specifically, the Clean Air Act Section 182 requires moderate and higher ozone non-attainment areas to implement reasonably available control technologies. This is known as the acronym RACT, for all control technique guidelines. That is known as CTGs. So what is RACT and CTG? RACT represents the lowest emission limitation for source that is capable of meeting through control technology that is reasonably available considering technological and economic feasibility. So a lot of words, really what it is you can technically apply it to your source and it can economically feasibly reduce emissions. While a CTG is the EPA guidance documents that recommend control techniques for reducing volatile organic compounds known as VOCs, emissions from specific source categories. And now VOCs are precursor to ozone, meaning that they react with other gases in our atmosphere to create ozone. So that's why this rule is focused on the VOCs. And this proposed rule is based on EPA's CTGs, and a CTG-based rule helped establish RACT to reduce VOC emissions that again contribute to the formation of ozone. So now we will dive into the rule itself, where we will go over the main parts of the rule. The rule covers 5 specific coating types. So we have fabric coating, which is a decorative or protective coating or reinforcing material applied either onto or impregnated into a textile fabric. And then we have film and foil coatings. Now these are pretty similar to each other, where a film coating is a coating applied in a web coating process on a film substrate other than paper or fabric. And a foil coating is very similar, which is a coating applied in a web coating process on a foil substrate other than paper or fabric. And now paper coating is coating applied on or impregnated into paper, including but not limited to adhesives, adhesive tapes, book covers, postcards, office copier paper, and drafting paper. And then lastly, we have vinyl coating. So decorative or protective or reinforcing coating applied over vinyl coating textile fabric or vinyl sheets. So we have our first poll question here, which you should find in the chat. And I'll have Sarah put that in the chat, which is which category best describes your organization? Let's see if that pops into the chat. Okay, I see it on my end. Please let me know if you're not seeing it on your end. And it looks like we are getting some responses. So I'll pause so we can respond to that. Yeah, and if you aren't getting the poll questions, feel free to just type it into the chat and we will take note about that as well. So it looks like we have about 8 responses right now. We have a lot of consultants in the room. And then some coding and printing facilities, some adhesives and chemical supplier facilities. I see some printing. And then, yeah, so government getting error message that bot is disabled. So if your organization has disabled the bot that allows you to put in the chat and cannot actually respond, feel free to just type in your answer and we'll take note within the chat itself. So it looks like we have a pretty good response with most of them being consultants. So we will keep continuing moving on. So diving into the rule more, this rule was developed from 2 specific CTGs, which gives us the VOC limits. The first CTG was done in 1977, which covers paper and fabrics, including vinyl. Then there was an updated CTG in 2007 for paper, film, and foil coatings that provided an additional guidance and applicability and VOC limits for the rule. Last week, we sent out a draft rule text, and this rule will be known as Section 108. This is an early draft, so it is subject to change. Further, it is important to note that this rule will be part of our SIP submittal come 2026. Therefore, it is required to be approved by EPA. So EPA could request specific changes within the rule itself. Now, a few important definitions to keep in mind as we go through the rule. We have 2 similar sounding terms that are different from one another. So the first being is your projected maximum emissions, known as your PME. This is your highest annual rate in tons per year that you are projected to emit of VOCs based on your anticipated production, throughput, or material utilization rates, but it does not include reductions from add-on controls. So this is more based on what you actually are planning to emit based on your operations, such as your production, throughput, and how much material you are planning on using. And then you have your potential to emit, this one down here, which is known as your PTE. This is your maximum capacity that your source can emit under its physical and operational designs. So in a little bit more simple terms, that is your maximum amount a source could emit if it ran at full capacity for your permitted hours. So in summary, the difference, your PME is more realistic to your actual operations, while your PTE is your maximum that you could emit. And the only enforceable limits can reduce your PTE. So diving into the rule applicability, the rule applies to paper, film, foil, and vinyl coating operations located in the hydrographic area 212, so the Las Vegas Valley. This rule will also apply to any further areas that are classified either as moderate or higher, so moderate, serious, severe, or extreme within the Clark County area. So if an area in the future were to be classified as moderate or serious, then this rule will become effective in that area as well. Further, there are proposed rule applicability. There are 2 major groups here. The first being is your coating operations if you have a PME of above 3 tons per year of VOCs or greater. then you are subject to the full rule, including your emission standards, your compliance obligations, your work practices, notification, record keeping, reporting, and registration. However, if you have a PME less than 3 tons of VOC per year, then you are not subject to the emission standards, some compliance obligation, and reporting, which we will discuss a little bit further in the presentation. Other operations that you are not applicable to the rule include if you are using less than 500 gallons of coating per year, if the coating is used on a test panel or coupon application, if the coating is used for packaging exclusively for food and healthcare products for human and animal consumption, and if the coating is used in research and development. Now, there are some partial exemptions here. So we will go over the first partial exemption for paper, film, and foil. The emission standards do not apply for any individual paper, film, or foil coating operations with an uncontrolled PTE equal to or less than 25 tons of VOC per calendar year. So for paper, film, and foil, there's really 3 buckets that you can kind of fall into. The first is if you have paper, film, or foil operations with a PME less than 3 tons per year, you are subject to work practices, certain compliance obligations, notification and record keeping, and then registration requirements. Now, if you have a paper and film coating operations that have a PME greater than 3 tons per year, but have an uncontrolled PTE less than 25 tons per year, then you are subject to compliance obligation, reporting, notification, work practices, record keeping, and registration, but you are not quite subject to the emission standards. And then finally, if you have a paper, film, or foil operations that have a PME greater than 3 tons per year and an uncontrolled PTE greater than 25 tons per year, you are subject to the full rule. So all those requirements, including the emission standards. Other partial exemptions for the rule include sources that are already controlled by RACT emission standards that are at least as stringent as the emissions within the rule. You still must comply with notification to the control officer and include record keeping and reporting as well. And then lastly, we have aerosol products. They must comply still with the emission standards and must identify VOC content, but work practices requirements and certain compliance obligations do not apply when you are only using aerosol products in their coating operations. Now we have another poll question here that is, what is your facility's approximate annual VOC emissions potential? And now if it didn't pop up directly for you, feel free to scroll down in the chat. Sometimes you do need to manually scroll down to see the poll questions. It looks like we only have 2 responses so far. We'll give you a moment to find your chat. And if you're not sure, you can put unsure, not available. Looks like we have about 3 responses now. We have Jessica saying unsure within just the chat. Thank you for that. I am not seeing any further responses. So we'll move on. Oh, we're having some difficulty responding to the chat. Okay, we will move on to the main rule requirements, and we'll have a few more poll questions coming up. So here are the main rule requirements, which are the emission standards. Again, emission standards are applicable for fabric and vinyl if you have a PME greater than 3 tons per year. And then for paper, foil, and film coatings, you have a PME greater than 3 tons per year and an uncontrolled PTE of 25 tons per year or greater. So there are 2 different ways you can comply with the rule here. The first way is to maintain an emission control system known as an ECS with a minimum overall control efficiency of 90%. And now if you choose not to use an ECS, you can use low VOC coatings that have a VOC content limit for the following coating categories within this table. And now there are a few things to note about this table. First, we have fabric and vinyl coatings. The limit is in mass per volume. And then while paper, film, and foil coatings, the limit is a ratio of mass. So you have kilograms per kilograms, pounds per pounds. Those would be the same as they are just a ratio of mass. The second thing I would also like to note is there were a few typos within the draft rule that was sent out on the units in this table. So for fabric and vinyl coatings, the first 2 or the second and third columns relate to fabric and vinyl coatings. The second column is in the metric units, and then the third column is in imperial units. So the imperial units are the pounds per gallon. I believe in the draft rule it had liters, and the denominator here it should be gallons. They are equal to each other, just in different units. And that will be cleaned up in the first official draft of the rule. And then for paper and film and foil coatings, this column here is your coating ratio, and then this last column here is for your solids ratio. And then the final thing to note is that pressure sensitive tape and label coating has a different emission standards, and that is in this bottom row here. And now I will give you a second to kind of absorb this table before we move on to a few more poll questions, and then we'll go over some work practices, and then we'll take a second to just answer any questions that we have before we dive into any other parts of the rule. All right, we will jump into 2 poll questions here. So the first one is, which compliance approach would be most practical for your operations? And now this is just helping DAQ understand, are you going to use the ECS approach or a lower VOC coatings? Let's see if you can answer it here. And if you can't answer it, just feel free to type in what you would plan to do within the chat itself, and we will record that answer. Looks like we are getting some more responses with this poll question now. All right, it looks like we have 5 responses, so we'll move on to the next poll question, which are the proposed VOC limits achievable using currently available materials? So available materials may be what you already have or what you know is known to you in the market that you can get. And then that should pop up again for you. It's either in the chat or it pops up. And we'll see if we get any responses on that. So it looks like we have a few unsures and then a few possible. Few more unsures. Okay, we will jump into work practices and then we will open it up for some questions if there are questions already. So onto our work practices. All facilities subject to Section 108 must implement the following work practices. These follow very closely with other coding rules within Clark County. So the first would be to label all containers with greater than 1 gallon or more with product name and VOC containing material type. Second, minimize air circulation around coating operation. Third, repair leaks, tears, cracks in containers within 1 day. Fourth, keep containers securely closed when not in use. Fifth, store VOC-laden rags and wipes in closed containers. Sixth, minimize spills and immediately clean up any spills that occur. And then finally, clean equipment without atomizing solvents and capture the spent solvent. Now, we will take a moment just for any questions. That was a lot of information. So after this, we will go further into the registration, the notification, record keeping, and reporting requirements. But first, are there any questions that we'd like to discuss now? And you can raise your hand, unmute yourself, put it in the chat. Megan Stanley, it looks like you have a question. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was just curious in the applicability section, C number 1 says that if a stationary source uses less than 500 gallons of coatings per calendar year in each paper, film, foil, fabric, or vinyl coating operation, then it would not apply. So if a facility does 2 of those things, for example, if they coat fabric and vinyl, is that 500 gallons per operation, or is it 500 gallons total that makes that section not applicable?
Yeah, I think Jennifer, do you want to take this one or you want me to?
So it would be per activity. So you could have 400 gallons of paper, 200 gallons of fabric, and you would be below that 500 gallon coating per calendar year for each individual operation.
Okay. And I had one other question, if it's okay to ask a second one.
Yeah, of course.
Under the exemption section 108.4, subitem C, it says that section 108.5 related to emission standards, which you were talking about before, doesn't apply with an uncontrolled PTE of equal to or less than 25 tons per calendar year. I guess what's the difference between uncontrolled PTE and PME?
So the difference between PTE and PME is PTE is based on uncontrolled throughput. So you're proposing your maximum throughput. Now, when you register, you cannot exceed the PTE that you calculate and estimate as your maximum, or you would have to submit an updated registration. PTE is uncontrolled and unlimited, and that is generally how the stationary source program determines applicability and thresholds. So that includes all the the normal pollutants, PM, NOx, VOC, CO, and it would be unlimited and uncontrolled. So that would be based off the equipment.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Well, to me, that sentence, uncontrolled PTE, kind of seems the same thing as PME. If you're defining PME as the maximum emissions based on your normal operation.
So
Well, I guess,
PTE is the equipment. So it's uncontrolled means you have not put a control device on it, be it an RTO, be it something of that nature, or bag house if you're doing PM. So they're both uncontrolled. Both PME and PT are uncontrolled. PTE is based off of the equipment's maximum capacity. PME is off of your maximum proposed throughput and usage.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
Thank
one
you.
is only VOCs, the other include the other regulated pollutants.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any other questions that we want to answer right now? We will have time later in the presentation as well. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we'll keep moving on. So now we'll dive into a few more parts within the rule. So for proposed registration requirements, all facilities subject to this rule must require or register unless covered by an existing permit. So registration includes your owner and operator contact information and responsible official, types of coding operations, the facility's PME with supporting calculations, and if you do choose to use an ECS, you must include that ECS information in operation and maintenance plan. Further, if you have a material change, you must submit an updated registration to your control officer within 60 days. For notification and record keeping requirements, for notification, if you choose to use an ECS, you must meet emission standards. Then you must conduct a performance test within 180 days of the initial operations of the ECS and submit a performance results and testing protocol to your control officer. And then if you are already subject to RACT emission standards as stringent as this rule, you can notify your control officer. And now for record keeping, you must maintain records to document your eligibility for applicability thresholds, meaning if you are using that PME lower than 3 tons per year, or you have less than 500 gallons per year, you must maintain that record. Please retain all the records for 5 years. You must also record the type, amount, and list of coatings being used. You must maintain record of calendar year emission calculations. And then if you choose to use an ECS, you must maintain record of that ECS operations. And finally, maintain the records of training and inspection logs. Now for the proposed annual reporting requirements, annual reporting is only required if the operations have a PME greater than or equal to 3 tons VOC per year. The annual reporting includes annual emission inventory with annual actual VOC emissions from the previous calendar year. The report needs to include your emission factors and calculations. Now, this is your actual VOC emissions, not your PME emissions here, yet your PME will help determine whether you need to report, but you are reporting your actual emissions. And then finally, the final certification must be submitted by your responsible official. And these reports will be due March 31st every year unless a different date is approved by a control officer. Finally, for compliance dates, now these will be filled in once the rule is effective with actual calendar dates. However, for right now, DAQ is looking at general compliance date of 180 days after the rule is effective. The registration due date will begin 180 days of the rule effective date, or facilities that are newly subject to the rule, it will be 45 days after becoming subject to the rule to register. There is a phase out period. So if you have existing inventory that is non-compliant with the emission standards, you may phase this out through 1 year after the effective date, meaning you can use your existing non-compliant inventory until 1 year after the rule is set. Finally, if you choose to comply with emission standards using an ECS, you have 540 days after the effective rule date. And then for all new operations, the effective rule date, you must comply, or for all new operations after the effective rule date, you must comply with the rule before you start your normal operations. And then we have another poll question here, which is, what level of financial impact do you anticipate from this rule? And this should, again, pop up for you, or it's within the chat. And just take your best guess here. Looks like we have 4 responses, either minimum or undetermined right now. I will give a minute to respond. All right, it looks like we have 5 responses. It seems like we're only getting about 5, 6 responses every time. So right now we're pretty undetermined, it looks like. So here is our rulemaking timeline, which I will hand off to Jennifer to discuss.
Thank you, Megan. I am Jennifer Lipkin. I'm the Principal Air Quality Specialist at Clark County Air Quality and the lead for the regulations. So the draft rule was made available to the public last week. We're having the workshop today. Thank you for attending. Your input is invaluable. We will provide 2 weeks for the public to provide feedback based on this example rule provided and the workshop. We'll take into consideration any comments. We do have to comply with the requirements from EPA and the CTG RAC that's established and other agencies that have approved rules, but we can revise, if we can work within those constraints and requirements, we will revise the draft rule, and then we'll again post it, allowing for additional public comment. This should happen towards the end of the year. Again, we'll take your comments into consideration and we'll post a proposed final draft that the department will present to the Board of County Commissioners, and that will be late spring of 2026. If approved, the rule will be effective late spring, early summer of 2026. And any dated requirements, as Megan went over, such as registration, notification, and work practices, would go into effect as identified in the final rule, which would be posted on the department website. And that is the timeline for this particular air quality regulation. So back to you, Megan, unless anyone has any questions about this.
I don't see any hands raises or anything in the chat. So we'll finish up with some final poll question here, which is, which areas would you benefit most from additional guidance or support, and how? Now, this is more of an open-ended question, so feel free to write your answer into the chat and we'll record that. And it's just trying to help DAQ understand, what would be most beneficial for our stakeholders here. And I will give you a moment to respond to that. And you can click multiple within this poll, so feel free to click multiple if it would be helpful. It looks like we have about 4 responses. Five responses. So I'm seeing record keeping and reporting being an important one to go over with some help. Emission testing and monitoring, as well as work practice standards, training and compliance assistance. Looks like we have 6 responses. So the next slide here is to go over some of the poll results that we have been seeing. We've kind of been talking about them throughout the presentation, but overall, oh, we got some more into the chat. Yeah, feel free again to put it into the chat. It looks like, some emission testing and monitoring, record keeping, reporting, work practices would all be pretty helpful for DAQ to add additional guidance around. The top from this poll here, I have 5 responses for record keeping and reporting. See if anything else comes in. I'm not seeing anything else come in, so we will jump to the next, opening it up for any. Oh, I have Sarah who is helping us out. Show some of the poll results here.
If you don't mind if I jump in, Megan?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I noticed we have a lot of consultants, and so that clearly brings a lot of variability to your responses. I see that we have a lot of unsure, not sure yet. Positive to see that I'll have minimal, the one individual that responded to the level of financial impact, it was minimal. With regards to the additional guidance, the department developed flow diagrams and frequently asked question documents for the other CTG RACT rules that are already in place and effective. Those can be found on the county website under the permitting forms and ozone rules. So we will, the department will provide those flow diagrams and FAQ documents. They should be available very soon after the rules are promulgated. As well as the department has a small business assistance program. And so if you have any other questions or just need help working through these new regulations, they're always available to you as well. And I'll let you provide any other feedback on the polling questions.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so it does look like we do have a lot of consultants in here, which is great to see. But yeah, it looks like for the first one, our coding or printing facilities and adhesives, and then some consultants. For the second question, which was what facility approximate annual VOC emission potential, it looks like we're unsure there. And then we had compliance approach would be most practical for your operations. We're not too sure yet. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty here. And then it does look like maybe some of these, this would be available with some reformulation done. So yep. And so we'll jump back in to if there's any questions. I'll take over again. Thanks, Sarah, for showing. So we'll open it up to any questions about the rule, any comments or anything. Again, you can raise your hand, you can put it in the chat, or just feel free to unmute yourself. And we do have some discussion questions after this, if there are no questions to start us off with. And Megan, it looks like you have a question. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, for facilities that do these types of coding operations that have minor source permits, would they need to do or submit a permit revision application for a material change?
Yes, I believe so. Jennifer, you want to take that?
Sure. So if you have an existing minor source, that would be that first exemption from portions of the rule. So what you would have to do is evaluate your existing permit, be it a major or minor source. Make sure it's complying with all the applicable requirements that are within the CTG RACT rule. If it is, you can submit that notification saying your minor source permit, which is authorized under another SIP approved rule, meets these standards, and and therefore you're in compliance with this regulation. If you're not, you would have to submit a minor source revision, but you have record keeping, annual reporting requirements. All of those things are already included in your minor source or stationary source permit. And so this should not be too much of a change. But again, so if you review your permit against this rule and it already meets the standards, then you would submit a notification to the department. If it doesn't, then you would revise your permit to include the requirements.
Right, right. But I'm more curious specifically about the material change that it references. It says for sources that have a registration, for any material change, they would need to update their registration
Yeah,
within
so if
60
you
days.
Yeah, so what that is if you move locations, if you there is a definition of material change in the rule. So material change is a change in the owner or operator, a change in the location, and compliance method. So if you said in your registration you were going to use an ECS, but now you're just going to use low VOC, that would be a material change. If you're using a different ECS or you increase the PME, and and it would trigger emission standards or so if you increase your proposed PME, then you would have to submit that updated registration.
Okay.
But if you have a permit, obviously all those things would, turn into an updated permit,
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so if there's no other questions right now, we do have a few discussion questions that we can ask you. So what concerns or challenges do you foresee with implementation of this rule? And what type of follow-up engagement would you prefer? And so again, feel free to unmute, put it in the chat, or if you have any other additional questions, feel free to ask now.
I think the only challenge I could foresee is a smaller operation that maybe can't, it's not economically feasible to implement an ECS, and they might have a difficult time finding lower VOC containing products that meet the requirements. But I think that would need more research, I guess.
Yeah, so if they're less than 3 PME, so we estimate that, the true really small sources, they would be less than 3 PME, so they would not require to meet the emission standards. They also have 12 months to use existing inventory. So in addition to the rule being promulgated, they also have 12 months to use existing inventory and make any adjustments to their process. So they do have some time to work through that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. That's really good to know. Any other thoughts? What about any follow-up engagement that you would prefer to see from DAQ around this rule?
I'm also going to do a shameless promotion for the Small Business Assistance Program here at the department. So every month, the Small Business Assistance Program provides workshops. Anyone can sign up. They do, preparing for an inspection. They also do a yearly air quality regulation update workshop. So they'll go over any new rules, any amendments to rules, and, reminders of upcoming regulatory deadlines. So that is also a good resource for anyone interested in the regulations.
Thanks, Jennifer, for that. We'll dive into the next steps and we'll leave a little bit more time for questions if anything pops up. So again, thanks again for joining today to discuss this proposed rule. DAQ will consider any feedback or comments during this presentation and anything that we get within the next 2 weeks. Feel free to reach out to aqregulations@clarkcountynv.gov. There will also be a future public input during the official public hearing portion of the rule, as Jennifer explained earlier. And also, please register for our coding mailing list. That way we can reach out to you when the official draft is available. And I will have JD put that link to register for the mailing list in the chat right now. And I will show you that link will bring you to this page here on the Clark County website in environment and sustainability, public communication outreach, and then sign up for emails and text. So it is in the chat now. We had Jennifer D. Winter put that register for the coding mailing list in the chat. And you will scroll down, you'll put your email in here, and then you will scroll down within this table here until you see planning notices, and then you'll click on customize and you can just choose coding stakeholders. If you would also like to sign up for the ozone attainment plan notices, you can click on that too. It's going to give me an alert right now because I didn't put an email in, but put your email in and then click on that, and then you are able to register for the mailing list. And now that will give you information on when the official draft is happening, when the official public hearing is happening, and then when the official rule is out. And then I will leave this page up with some DAQ contacts. And then thanks so much again for joining us, and we'll take any final questions, any comments that you have. And I'm not seeing any final questions. So again, thank you so much for attending, and I'll pass it to Dawn with any final remarks.
Thank you to everyone in attendance for your invaluable input. Special thanks to TRC for promoting and preparing this workshop, and to SCI for leading the conversation. Please note the contact details in the final slide, and feel free to reach out to anybody on our team with any questions, comments, or concerns. Again, thank you for joining us, and goodbye.